Welcome to the Explainer. So, what if the US Constitution wasn't just a legal document, but actually the final expression of a much older, kind of unseen blueprint? Today, we're going to dive into a text that argues exactly that a core set of philosophical and, yeah, even theological ideas are what shaped the entire American system of government. And it all kicks off with one of the most famous phrases in American history. According to the source we're looking at, this line isn't just some nice, elegant prose. No, this is the foundational premise. It's the one single idea that the entire American experiment is supposedly built on. So, what is that core idea, really? Well, the text argues it's this. Our most basic fundamental rights, they don't come from government. They don't come from kings or from any human law. They come from a higher power, from God. And that is the divine blueprint. Now, the author argues that while the Constitution itself is not a religious text, the people who wrote it, well, they were working from a shared set of assumptions about things like human nature and liberty, and these ideas, which were inherited from a biblical worldview, are presented as the invisible pillars holding the whole structure up. Okay, so what's the first pillar in this blueprint? According to the source, it all starts with a very particular, and let's be honest, kind of sobering view of human nature itself. Because before you can build a government, you've got to decide what you believe about the people who are actually going to run it. The source points right to this classic quote from James Madison as Exhibit A. The argument is that the founders had a really clear-eyed, totally realistic view of human fallibility, right? They weren't designing a system for perfect angels, they were designing one for imperfect people. And this is where the source directly connects political science to theology. It argues that this idea of a fallen human nature is the key to understanding things like checks and balances. From this viewpoint, the separation of powers isn't just some clever political invention, it's a necessary safeguard, a restraint on the ambition and the potential for corruption that exists in all of us. Next up, the source lays out a trio of pillars that are all interconnected. You've got rights, law, and liberty. These three concepts, they all work together to define the proper relationship between you, the government, and that ultimate source of authority. The second pillar just hammers home that point we started with. The government doesn't create our rights. Its one and only legitimate job is to secure the rights we citizens already have, rights that, again, come from a creator. The third pillar is all about the rule of law. And the source argues that the very idea of a written constitution, a supreme law that binds even the most powerful people, reflects a biblical model. In that model, even the kings were subject to God's law. They couldn't just put themselves above it. And the fourth pillar, well, it defines what liberty even is. According to this text, it's not the freedom to just do anything you want. It's what's called ordered liberty, which is the freedom to do what is right. This whole idea depends on citizens being virtuous and morally responsible, a quality the source argues the founders thought was absolutely essential for a republic to survive. Okay, so all these pillars are building toward one final, really crucial one. And this one defines the very purpose and the proper limits of government power, at least according to this interpretation. This perspective argues for a government with very sharp limits. Citing an interpretation of Romans 13, it suggests that government's proper job is pretty simple. Punish evil and protect the good, period. Not to run every single aspect of our lives. So constitutional ideas like enumerated powers are seen as the legal way of expressing that principle, designed to keep government in its very limited lane. So a big question is, where did the founders even get these ideas? The source argues they didn't just invent them out of thin air in 1787. Instead, it traces a direct historical line for this entire blueprint, going back more than 100 years. The source basically says that the Constitution was the end result of over 150 years of practice. It started way back with early colonists using written agreements like the Mayflower Compact to govern themselves. And that tradition grew up through the colonial charters and finally reached its highest political expression in the Constitution. All right, so let's bring this all home. The source ties it all together to explain why, in its view, this whole philosophical blueprint isn't just some dusty old history lesson, but something that is profoundly important for us today. So what's the big takeaway here? Well, the source argues that the health of the republic is directly tied to these foundational ideas. The belief that human nature needs to be checked, that real freedom requires virtue, and that our rights come from a higher power, these are all presented as the anchors holding liberty in place. And that brings us to the final, really provocative question the text leaves us with. It frames this whole argument as a challenge for us, right now, asking if a society that drifts away from these philosophical anchors will, inevitably, also drift away from liberty itself.